Thank you very much, Maria. Yes, happy Valentine's Day. I hope it'll be happy for many people, but last year was this year. We can see that it's not so many young people are not very happy in Ukraine, but and it's unfortunate that we will be talking on the Valentine's Day not about love but about war. And I want to introduce you a very special man, truly a very special man, a true American hero. Be honest with you, I'm a little bit jealous. I want this is the guy I wanted to be, all my life. This is the American hero I wanted to be, and it is Major General Mike Repass. Major General in Russian. I know there are going to be some smart people going to say, "Oh, Major General, this the rank doesn't exist." And yeah, it does. Believe me, it does. The only thing is, in Russian, it is a one-star general. In the United States, it's a two-star general, and a lieutenant general in Russia is a two-star, and in the United States, it's a three-star general. So, Major General in the United States is a little bit bigger general than in Russia. So. General Repass graduated from a famous military school. We call them academies. Military Academy West Point. Many people heard of it. This is where we actually make generals, I think, at a very young age. And not only did he graduate from that famous school and became a lieutenant, an officer of infantry. And I am wearing an army tie in his honor. You can see the little soldiers there. And he spent most of his career, 30-year lifetime career with a very famous, the tip of the spear, 101st Air Assault Division with a band of brothers, as we know, as Screaming Eagles. Many movies, many books are written about these brave men, and he was a special forces guy. With also we know of them, and let me just latest. He started out from a lieutenant to the major general, pretty much with the same outfit, and became a commander of Special Operations Command Europe and commanding general of the United States Army Special Forces Command and Special Operations Command in Europe. His career took him to more places than it took me. He spent time in Grenada, and I guess that was Ortega time, sir. Am I correct?
No, that was a different. Ortega was Panama, but
Panama.
it was a different band of thugs. The same theme.
Grenada. I mean, there's a movie, Rage Something, with Clint Eastwood, and I don't know if anybody told you look a little bit like Clint Eastwood. So with the Grenada, where the Cubans were, with Egypt, NATO headquarters, Germany, Okinawa, Japan, and of course in the Operation Iraqi Freedom. And he has been married all his life, I guess, to a lady called Linda, his wife, and they have one son. And now General is a chief executive officer of a Global Solutions, Able Global Solutions. And the General and I share many friends together. I had an honor to serve under also Major General Bernard Levky, who speaks Russian, Chinese, and 7 other languages. And I have On Target with Captain Tabach, a program where I'm interviewing General Levky, who's a legend, I think, in our country. And also, we just learned that my former boss also is a classmate from West Point of General Repass. Well, General, thank you so much for joining us, because this is very important at this moment in history that somebody like you, somebody who knows, I don't know anybody who would know more about special operations, special forces than you would, to join us, to join Maria and I, and we'll try to answer some of the questions that we have. And I know Maria has, as angel as she looks, there is also a devil in her that she will ask very, very tough questions. So, Maria, please, you have a first frontal attack on a general for whom I feel sorry at this point.
I will make a short question first of all, because Gary presented you already. I don't want to spend the time of our viewers, and thank you very much, Gary, for doing it so precisely. I want to thank you for sharing St. Valentine's Day with us. And my first question is, from your opinion, what do you think generally about the military support of United States given to Ukraine? What do you think about it? Is it sufficient, insufficient, slow, quick? Can you give the characteristics?
So my overall opinion is that it's been somewhat robust. There are some areas that are clearly lacking, and I've talked to many people about this, where we could improve in two areas. One, in capabilities, we could be more robust, and certainly in timeliness. But the timeliness gets into some unique aspects that are Ukrainian, and the Ukrainians need to help us on that. But let me go to the robustness first. There are things that we aren't doing that we should do. And one of them is to help on the logistics side, to provide more timely logistics. I suppose that a better way of doing business, and one that I'm very familiar with in wartime, is a push system of logistics, where instead of waiting for a list of requirements to come out of Ukraine, we know what the armaments are in Ukraine, and we anticipate what the use rate is and what the repair rate should be. And we push that equipment, those supplies and repair parts to Ukraine on a push basis, rather than waiting for a number of weeks for a list to be consolidated, to get approved at the general staff, and to come out to the various nations for sourcing. That's a very inefficient way of doing business. It also ensures that you're somewhere between 8 and 12 weeks behind your actual requirements on the ground. So I think the U.S. and NATO need to help on the logistics side of the house, to fix that aspect of what's going on there. In terms of capabilities, there are things that we aren't doing that we should do, and do more of. The first one is on the tank side. The tanks should have been fielded there long before they're going to be in place, which is another, into March is the earliest arrival of the U.S. tanks as it is currently forecasted. They probably should have been there at the end of November or early December, in my opinion, if not sooner. The other thing that we're not providing, we are not providing the ATACMS missiles, which have an extended range, much farther than the current set of missiles that the United States and the West have provided throughout the conflict. Now, the United States is providing these medium-range missiles, these small diameter glide bombs, which are launched and have a glide factor to them that extend their range out to probably double of what we're seeing currently with the HIMARS. Those will be useful, but I don't think they pack the same punch that an ATACMS missile would punch. So with the ATACMS, you could range the Kerch Strait Bridge. You could range the airfields in Crimea. Yeah, that would eliminate that as a safe haven for the launch of the UAVs and the Shahed drones that are pummeling the Ukrainian infrastructure, primarily the electric infrastructure. So I think the ATACMS would be a much needed capability that they don't have and we haven't provided and don't intend to provide, because it can range deeply into Russia as well. So that's a problem. However, let me say something. I saw your interesting video on Lend-Lease. I should say that you have to be careful of what you ask for in that case, because what you have now is you have overwhelming support in Congress for supporting the war effort, essentially blank checks going to Ukraine. And that's bipartisan. If you go to a Lend-Lease situation, I think you will lose that bipartisan support, because the politicians, as you rightly noted, Maria, there are other things that are hung on to that legislation. We call them Christmas ornaments. It's like you put an ornament on a tree. Your favorite ornament gets onto the tree into the front, or maybe you sneak it around to the back, but it's still onto the tree. And it gets funded, and it takes care of their constituents. That moves the package along. When you take that away and go to strictly a Lend-Lease program, then you will see a significant decline in political support, particularly bipartisan support for supporting Ukraine. So I think you're in a good position right now. The mechanism is there. It's not everything that you want. It's certainly not everything that you need, but it's working sufficiently well, I would say. And there's a lot of room for improvement. So that's a long answer to your very important question.
But, sir, well, why can't Lend-Lease work in parallel with other programs as well? Because with the money that's allocated in the other programs is just not enough to buy what's needed in Ukraine. I mean, we're just dishing out another almost $500 million to build Abrams tanks that will arrive here in a year. And it's a 31 tanks, which not with really updated armor, when we have 6,000 of those tanks sitting in a desert, preserved. So why can't all these programs work at the same time? So we do not lose legislatives in a bipartisan Congress, and we also provide the gap, to fill the gap between them with the Lend-Lease. We have difficulty explaining to people here is, why did the United States Congress voted for the Lend-Lease? President signed it, but hasn't worked. I mean, it was supposed to simplify things, but actually turned out to be that it complicated things. And politicians use it. For example, in Ukraine, they're saying, "Oh, if Republicans will come, then all of the aid will stop," which is very strange because many Republicans are speaking out for more aid to Ukraine. So, but there is this propaganda that is just unstoppable. So we don't understand, why can't all these programs work? Why can't all these programs work together on parallel, and Lend-Lease fills up whatever we don't provide? Yes.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for you, Yuri. Theoretically, these programs could work in parallel, but I would see the one downfall of that would be how Congress appropriates funds to support Lend-Lease. If all the funds are going into the Presidential Drawdown Authority, PDA, if under the current program we're spending $40 billion or allocating $40 billion, the question is, how much are you going to allocate to Lend-Lease? And I agree. What the law does is it authorizes the transfer of equipment under the so-called Lend-Lease program. I'll come back to that in a moment. The authority to do it is not the same as the money to allow it, if you will. Or correction, the authority to allow it is not the same as the funding to do it. So the question is, where is Congress going to put their money? Are they going to put it behind Lend-Lease, or are they going to go with this other program that is much favored by them because they can put their congressional Christmas ornaments on there to help out back home. So theoretically, and in an objective world, you could run both programs together. However, it has become politically expedient to run it through the current process of Presidential Drawdown Authority. Now, in regards to the processes that you spoke about during your previous session on Lend-Lease, streamlining the processes, that's actually happened. Whether it's been reported out to Congress or not, the Department of Defense and the Defense Security Cooperation Agency, DSCA, you're very familiar with them. They have streamlined a lot of processes to include the State Department process for releasing things that are covered by the International Trade in Arms Regulations, ITAR, where it's gone from a year or more for approvals down to weeks or less to approval. So that process moves rather quickly. And it's happened outside of congressional reporting. I think the Lend-Lease Act actually coerced them to actually do this. I spoke to them a while back, asked them why they weren't moving faster, and they said, well, this is what we are doing, and got a bit of an education on them on the process. So I think there are things that have happened that, in practical terms, the Presidential Drawdown Authority processes have happened because they were coerced to happen under Lend-Lease, and Congress has found that it's easier and much more, I would say, advantageous to them politically to go with that authority rather than Lend-Lease. But objectively, I do agree with the point that you could run potentially both programs at the same time.
Well, but because Maria and I and all of us, we're sitting here, and I hear outside, and I think it's anti-air Ukrainian is working very well. But again, we're thinking that there's so much destruction and so many lives, and I thank you. We all thank you from the bottom of our hearts, because one thing I didn't mention, you do take part in helping Ukrainian wounded soldiers that we're bringing in to Ukraine to be repaired and to get them prosthesis and so on. Thank you very much, sir. But there's so much of this going on here. There's cities are being wiped out from the face of the earth. There are 10 million refugees, people that lost everything, lost their homes. There's so much suffering, and yet why couldn't we provide air cover, anti-missile defense? It's very strange that we're just so, American aircraft carrier turns very slowly, but once it turns, you better watch out. But it seems to me like we're turning very, very slowly in this sense. Maybe because I'm here, and maybe because I'm seeing it all with my own eyes. And it seems to me that some KGB thug is keeping us hostage and threatening us with the nuclear weapons and so on. We just can't. I just feel like we can't let him get away with it. We let him get away with it for too long.
May I add a little bit also? When we are saying about air coverage, it also draws us back to the Lend-Lease Act, because getting these type of aircrafts is also an additional burden on American taxpayers. Should it be provided by the Lend-Lease program, then the already decades ago produced aircrafts could be delivered to Ukraine, and it would cover the air, and of course the losses would be much less.
All right. The answer is yes, and yes on all points that you make, Maria. I don't disagree with any of that. The politics behind providing aircraft are entirely rotten, as Yuri pointed out. So I don't disagree with anything you said, and I do agree that they can and should be provided, regardless of the program, whether it's Lend-Lease or Presidential Drawdown Authority. So either one.
And I would say a quicker way of doing it, because as you know, sir, and when we were in Poland, we transferred the F-16s, and I know with your classmate, it drove him crazy because it was so complicated and so long to transfer. It's not just airplanes. Training a pilot is probably the easiest thing. My nephew's a pilot, and he can fly a chair if anything that flies, he'll fly. It doesn't take him long. These guys are just so sharp. And but why can't we provide UAVs that can take off right from here? And I mean, there are a lot of different ways we can go around it, but I think you were probably more comfortable in answering questions about special forces.
That's okay.
How do you think the Russian forces are performing? What is your opinion of the Russian military at this point?
Well, I think they're underperforming. I think there's a lot of people that have drawn the same conclusion. They've underperformed in almost every dimension that you can imagine. The land forces have proved incapable of conducting ground operations in a modern era, specifically multi-axis attacks, not only conducting the offensive, but sustaining it. So the Russians have not performed well on a number of dimensions, specifically the battalion tactical groups, which is their, it was a very interesting and very, I would say, innovative approach to combined arms maneuver and warfare. So they started out the war with a formation known as the battalion tactical groups, which had not only infantry and armor, but they had artillery, air defense, electronic warfare, engineering assets, etc. So these battalion tactical groups had up to 200 vehicles with them, and they were advancing on a narrow front and became too much for a single commander to effectively command and control, particularly with the poor state of technology that the Russians had. So the Russians have abandoned their basic tactical formation of the battalion tactical group. That also took away their ability to mass artillery fires, which, as we know, is the major way that Russia fights this war, is with artillery to destroy everything in front of it, and then they advance the infantry and armor. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, under their reorganization that's been going on for about 10 years, they reduced the number of infantrymen and the ground troops inside the vehicles, the armored personnel carriers, the BMPs and BTRs and MTLBs. So they reduced those numbers because they wanted to apply those numbers to those people to have more vehicles in the formation. So they had the same number of people, but they wanted to increase the number of battalion tactical groups. And what they did is they took the infantry out of the vehicles. So you have reports of Ukrainian forces destroying BMPs with just a driver and a commander in it. There's no dismounted troops in the back. Because they don't have any dismounted troops, when they get into a restricted terrain situation, like they had when they were all backed up on the roads or when they're in an urban environment, they don't have those infantry to dismount and protect the armor or the other formations that are there. And as a result of that, they were getting chewed up in the restrictive terrain because they didn't have the infantry to go with it. So organizationally, they made changes down at the tactical level that worked against their effectiveness, and it still is a problem today. What they did was they wasted the skilled leadership at the tactical level and the skilled infantrymen and tankers. They wasted it in the previous scenario. Now they've reorganized and they've got a bunch of reservists that have been called up that are poorly trained, and you've got prisoners. You've got they've got very low skill tactical troops, not only at the individual level, but also at the small unit tactical leadership level. As a result of that, you have a decreasing effectiveness among the Russian forces. Now, the way they're making up for it is twofold. One, by massing artillery fires, and two, by mass assaults. or mass repetitive assaults. So their tactical method now is exhausting Ukrainian defenses, meaning they just send in. I got a report last week. The Russians are attacking in column 3 times a day on the same route, trying to do the same thing, and we destroy them every time. And there's some great pictures online now of how the Russians are being destroyed in the same place, in the same way every time, because they attack the same place in the same way every time. So anyway, so they've burned through their skilled leadership at the tactical level. Now they're dealing with inexperienced people, and they have to be very simple in their approaches. And as a result, their casualties in proportion to Ukrainians is absolutely exponentially higher. It doesn't mean they're not being successful because they're throwing so many people at the problem. If they mobilize again, or they bring to bear this other 300,000 people, then I think we're in for a tactical problem. But so that's where you're at tactically. There are a couple other things that I think are important on Russian performance. The first one is that the military leadership reflects the national leadership. And in Russia, you have an autocratic leadership style. It emanates from Putin, and everybody does what Herr Putin has to say. In the military, they've reflected that in that they have a very autocratic way of doing business. This is your objective, and this is how you're going to do it. There's no room for innovation. There's no room for deviating from that. You can't modify your plan. There are a lot of things you can't do. So as a result of that, they have no flexibility at the tactical level because it's dictated from higher up. Additionally, I think they have the Russian strategic leadership, specifically Herr Putin and his senior leaders that work underneath him, overestimated their abilities. One of the questions that you asked me early on when we were working up to this session was, why did they attack? Well, because they thought they would win. It's a simple answer, quite frankly. They thought they would win. They had a strategic misjudgment of epic proportions, where they overestimated their abilities to accomplish their strategic objectives in Ukraine. We can talk about that in a moment. But in the strategic art and science, where you identify your strategic end, and do you apply your means, your resources, and your ways, your methods to get to those ends, you had an ends mismatch with the ends, or with the means and the ways. Okay, so they overestimated their capabilities because their means were insufficient to achieve their ends strategically. And as a result of that, they've become bogged down. They can't go forward and they can't back out. They're stuck. They're strategically stuck right now.
Right.
So that's a huge problem. Okay, so and let me just pause here after my next point, and that is simply this: the long-standing veil of invincibility that Russia has enjoyed until February 24th of 2022, that veil has been pierced. It has been ripped to shreds by the Ukrainian military. Nobody's afraid of the Russian bear at the tactical level anymore, because we know they're not particularly competent. So that has raised a lot of internal security issues of the Russian hinterlands, east of the Urals in particular, of the greater Russia out into the east. So if you're Kadyrov, as an example, from Chechnya, you know that you have an opposition at home, and that there are 2 battalions of Chechnyans fighting on the side of the Ukrainians. You know that there's a Russian diaspora fighting in Ukraine for Ukraine against Russia. So you know that you have a larger security issue, because this veil of national invincibility that Russia has enjoyed up until this war has been stripped away. So I'll pause there for your reflection.
Yes, and it's also, they know when, which I particularly enjoy, when a great American general Repass refers to us when he talks about Ukrainians. So it's a little Freudian there, but it really sounds good, sir. We get them every time, and when Ukrainians get them every time, right? We get them. There you go. Okay, so actually you've answered my next question, which was how do you think the Ukrainians are performing, which was probably unexpected by all of us that they would do, but you answered that the difference between. Maria, please.
Yes, we have some interesting news, well, troubling maybe in a way, because I read yesterday that France and Canada asked their citizens to leave Belarus. Can you comment on that advice that France and Canada gave to their citizens who stay right now in Belarus? Why should they leave immediately Belarus? What is under that advice?
So typically a nation will issue a notice out of the embassy for its citizens to leave the country because they perceive a threat of some sort. So there are two parts to your question, Maria, and it deals with the security situation in Belarus. My understanding of what's going on in Belarus is that the Russians that were mobilized, in large part, are being trained in Belarus. Those forces are being moved around to the east to be employed in the Donbass. There's some speculation in some capitals that there will be a Russian attack from Belarus itself. I disagree with that assessment. I also disagree with those that would say that Belarus will also attack with Russia from Belarus into Ukraine. I don't think that would happen. I don't think, first off, the Belarusian forces are entirely horrible and not up to the task. They would be a burden to the Russians, even as bad as the Russians would be themselves. The second part of that is the Belarusian people would not put up with an attack of their army onto Ukrainian soil. My read of the situation is that Lukashenko fears his people much more than he fears the Ukrainian army. And if his people saw that Lukashenko had agreed to attacking with his forces, with Belarusian forces, into Ukraine, that the people would rise up against him. There's significant evidence that the Belarusian army would not obey such orders to attack across the border into Ukraine. And I think there's a significant resistance there that is an enhanced capability that has grown out of the last series of elections that as we know, were entirely corrupt and stolen by Lukashenko with the help of President Vladimir Putin. So with all of that creates a high degree of uncertainty inside Belarus. At a time when we know that Russia is going to attack Ukraine with the forces that it's mobilized over this past fall, potentially from Belarus, or use the Belarusian bases as a place to launch attacks from via air or potentially over the ground. So that creates, I would say, public danger inside Belarus, in that there could be political unrest to counter those moves. And that would catch the Canadians and the other foreign nationals in between, I would say, popular discontent, which may be violent, and the security forces that will undoubtedly violently repress them. So the idea is to get them out of the way in the event that there's some type of domestic, I would say, I won't call it a revolution, but domestic uprising for sure.
Thank you very much for your answer. Thank you very much. Now it's much more clear to me what's going on there. Also, I have a more specific question. You know probably better than anyone else. Airborne Division, Air Assault Screaming
Brigade.
Eagles, is partially
Brigade.
stationed in Romania, next to the Ukrainian borders. What is the mission?
She's pulling secrets out of us. She's pulling secrets out of you, sir. I believe it's a brigade there. It's a full brigade.
Yeah. They've got a forward command post and a brigade there. That's a. I have no secrets worth the extraction, but
Maria knows how to.
In this case, their presence there, A, is not a secret, and B, is not as sexy as we would like it to be, or as menacing as we would like it to be. So first off, it's regional stability and assurance to our very good regional ally, Romania. Back in the early aughts, in the 2000s, there was a gentleman that was in charge of U.S. Army Europe, B.B. Bell. He was a four-star general. And he had the vision to say, look, we're drawing down forces in Europe, but we need to set up infrastructure and outposts throughout Europe that we can potentially fall in on in times of crisis or conflict. One of such places is MK Air Base in eastern Romania, near it's slightly west of the port of Constanta. So the headquarters is going into MK Air Base, and then you've got the actual operating forces, some of which are there, and then some are out dispersed in other places, to include in Bulgaria. And there's a training base, a very nice training grounds in Bulgaria, and then also out the Romanian army. The primary purpose is reassurance, but with that, on the U.S. side, it's reassurance to NATO allies. But on the U.S. side, it gives us a forward capability in the case of circumstances that spiral out of control, or we need to rapidly surge forces forward. We've already got a brigade on the ground on the eastern flank of NATO, positioned and well-trained and capable of moving forward if need be. So it serves both a NATO purpose and a U.S. Contingency purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. Because
just to remind that we did have a missile go over Romanian airspace into Ukraine, and we also had 2 missiles hit Poland. Both of them are on NATO allies, where they killed 2 men. So far we're being very very light on Putin in those actions. Go ahead, Maria. I'm sorry.
Yes, that was a part of my question. Russia all the time declares that it is at war with NATO. In confirmation of its intentions, even missiles are launched into NATO's airspace. What else needs to happen so that NATO does not remain silent behind the backs of Ukrainian soldiers? In the United States, do people realize at all? I mean, the Russian media, they are full of those threats directly to United States. They all years, but now especially. Do people realize that Russia declares to be fighting with NATO? Evidently, in Romania, 2 missiles went into the airspace of NATO. Where is the response?
So first off, let me separate the U.S. and NATO. So NATO has been full-throated and unequivocal in its support for Ukraine. short of war. NATO has not found the conditions necessary to declare a war on Russia over Ukraine. Now, I would also point out that according to U.S. media reporting, which we know is occasionally flawed, I'll be generous in that regard. Romania has stated that when Moldova declared that missiles overflew its territory from Romania, Romania has said that that's not true. They've disavowed that. The Romanian government has. I will accept it as truth, and just to move forward on the discussion here. Let's say that's true. Now, are we going to go to war over missiles overflying territory, or are we going to go to war over bombardment of MK airfield or something like? So, on the scale of violence, missile overflight is pretty low compared to other things that could potentially happen and that Russia is capable of doing. They're capable of acting asymmetrically, both in the gray zone and also overtly, to go to war with NATO. So if Russia is truly at war with NATO, I don't see it doing any offensive operations against NATO on NATO sovereign territory. So the rhetoric is interesting, but the rhetoric is for domestic consumption as opposed to international consumption. Specifically, there are indications and warnings that go along with Russian mobilization towards war with NATO, and there will be signposts along the way where we say, okay, they're gearing up for war against NATO. Maybe they attack Narvik or they mass on the Estonian border or even the Lithuanian border to press into the enclave there, Kaliningrad. So there are specific indications and warnings that would truly indicate that Russia is mounting or is at war with NATO. Having said that, Russia knows that if it engages in a proper war with NATO, that war will be over in a matter of days and weeks at the most extreme. Because the capabilities that NATO would bring to bear are beyond anything that Russia could bear. They would not be able to sustain it. So what the rhetoric is to keep the rhetoric is there in their local papers and in the international press to keep their populace focused and engaged. It is not there to draw NATO into the fight. They would love to have that because then they can galvanize their people because the people doubt whether or not there's actual NATO forces there. So anyway, that's a long way to say that I don't think there's anything meaningful behind the Russian rhetoric that they're at war with NATO, other than is for domestic political purposes. Now, the U.S., on the other hand, has to pay attention to what Russia says because of the nuclear situation there. The U.S. has not only a national responsibility for nuclear deterrence and nuclear protection, but they also have a larger responsibility to their NATO partners. It would be unwise for the U.S. to do something, I would say, that is out of proportion with the actual threat presented by Russia and rapidly escalate into a nuclear war without the Europeans fully on board with this. And there's nothing to indicate that we're actually going towards a nuclear escalation. There's rhetoric in that way. There's foolish rhetoric. But the sane-minded people in both Moscow and Washington see this with clear eyes, and that they're separating the international and domestic rhetoric in Russia from facts on the ground. So it's not like one day Russia wakes up and says, okay, Putin walks over and says, "I'm going to hit the red button here, and we're going to launch, a nuclear attack on the United States." There's a lot of preparation that goes into that. Those preparations would be known. Okay, so over the years, we've built up confidence in security building measures to where both sides understand where they're at in the nuclear escalation ladder. Excuse me. And we're not sufficiently high on the nuclear escalation scale. So the United States is not going to be, I would say, drawn into a nuclear conflict or NATO drawn into a conflict with Russia over the rhetoric that they've expressed so far. It has to be much more, I would say, physical and violent for either the U.S. unilaterally or U.S. multilaterally with partners outside of NATO, or NATO as an alliance to go to war with Russia.
Thank you, sir.
Let me modify a little bit my question then.
Yeah.
The U.S. President, Joe Biden, warned in February 2022, if Russia targets an American citizen in Ukraine, the U.S. will respond forcefully. That's this is his direct words. By that time now, Brent Anthony Renault was an American journalist, documentary filmmaker, and photojournalist. Renault was shot and killed by Russian soldiers in Irpin, Kiev Oblast, Kiev district of Ukraine, while covering the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine. Then, Ukraine's International Legion has named the U.S. citizen killed during the combat of eastern Ukraine, Timothy Griffin, is believed to be the 6th American who has died in Ukraine since the Russian invasion in February. Where is the forceful response?
We also just had another American killed, a former Marine. I know there's no such thing as a former Marines, but a brother Marine got killed. He's a volunteer. He was actually helping elder people to move out of the harm's way. I think he was killed yesterday. Yeah.
Okay, so a couple of points. First off, the death of Ukrainian citizens and international citizens is not acceptable. It's not acceptable to me. It's not acceptable to a lot of people. However, the manner in which they are killed should be understood, in that these people were doing what they wanted to do outside of U.S. government sanction. When a soldier engages another soldier or another person in the course of combat, nobody wears identification badges that can be seen at 300 yards saying, "Okay, I'm a U.S. citizen, don't shoot me." Things like that. So unfortunately, artillery does not discriminate nationalities. And that's the primary killer of both civilians and military inside Ukraine, is artillery. So it's indiscriminate violence, which the Geneva and Hague Conventions attempted to restrict to only that of necessity. What we see in play in Ukraine is Russian wanton violence visited upon civilians and military alike. There's no discrimination there, which is clearly a violation of international law and humanitarian law. So that is extremely objectionable on multiple levels.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, but let me just finish off with this. I'll give you a vignette. So I commanded forces that went to Iraq. On my first tour of duty over there, a gentleman that had worked for me before had reached retirement eligible status in the Army. And I talked to him. I said, Rich, I thought you were going to retire. where's your paperwork? He says, oh, I'll get it on your desk. And sure enough, his paperwork for retirement showed up on my desk. In the meantime, our deployment orders for Iraq showed up. And he came to my office. And he said, hey, where are my retirement papers? I said, right here in my inbox. Do you want me to sign them? He goes, no, tear them up. I said, no, I'm not going to tear them up. He said, hey, you can sign them when we get back from this deployment. I said, okay, fine. So I gave him his retirement papers back, and I said, don't tear them up because I want them back after the deployment. He said, okay, that's a deal. And his parting word to me was, I want to go on combat deployments with you, because we had a very tight personal relationship. He was a non-commissioned officer that I'd known for a number of years. I said, okay. I said, but Rich, if you go over there and you get hurt, I'm going to kill you. So the deployment happens. And sure enough, unfortunately, he was killed. And I got to live with that every single day of my life. Okay? That's a burden that I carry. That affects me. Fast forward another year, we're going back to Iraq. And the same thing, guy comes to me and says, hey, I want you to hold off on my retirement paperwork because I want to go to Iraq. I said, no, absolutely not. I'm signing your retirement paperwork. He says, is this because of Rich? And I said, yes, it is. And this is what he told me. And this is what comes to this is the point I'm trying to make. He goes, sir, he said, I could retire and go home, and then I could walk across the street and be hit by a car. That would be a waste. Me going to Iraq, fighting with my buddies and the people that I grew up with in the military. If I were to get killed, that's a sacrifice, but that's a price I'm willing to pay. That is not a waste. I died doing what I wanted to do. So those 6 Americans died knowing full well the perils that they faced, but they died doing what they want to do. Okay? That is outside of U.S. sanction. But my heart goes out to them and their families. But I know that those men died doing what they wanted to do.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. And I hope my family will listen to this and appreciate. And I hope, because I have a lot of struggle with my friends and family with this, but I think we appreciate what you just said, Marie and I, because I think that our listeners and you can appreciate this, because we see death and destruction here every day. We see children getting killed, women, older people freezing. Maria is, she sits there, but I know she's cold. I know that because I'm cold. And there's no electricity. People are dying from stress. And the reason why we're saying land lease, weapons. The more weapons you're going to give Ukrainians, the less death is going to be here. The sooner they're going to defend themselves, and we'll stop the killing. Just stop this, this cult of death that this KGB thug sends down our way. And this is why we're so eminent about it. This is why we're so emotional about it, because we see it, because this is very close to us. And how can we abandon these people? How can we stand by and watch this going on? And this is why we're pressuring our government. We're pressuring our congressmen. We're pressuring everybody to do something about it. We can't stand here, a World War II type of thing, watching Jews being burned, Egyptians being killed, and so on and so on. This is just not an American way of being. This is not America that I loved and I fought for and I swore to defend. And this is my next question to you, sir. President of Poland, President Duda, just said a couple of days ago, he said, if Ukrainians are not going to get weapons very soon, they have a chance of losing this. They have a chance of losing the war. And, I'm a product of Soviet Reagan time. I remember, like yesterday, that President Reagan called Soviet Union an evil empire. Yeah. I wrote him a letter. I said, I'm going to join the United States Marine Corps. I know what you're saying, sir. I know what you're saying, Mr. President. there's another story where he did answer me. I was in high school then, and that was a strong leader, in my opinion. This is when the Soviet Union collapsed. I took part and I watched it, all this. I lived through all this. And I'm thinking, is Putin acting this way now because we have a weak leadership? Because European weak leadership? Because in the United States we're all split up and fighting among each other? Why is he doing this now? Why can't we just stop him and show him strength? Because that's all I think this thug knows or understands. I don't think he understands negotiations or any kind of moral boundaries. I don't know. This is just my opinion. It's not even a question, sir. I know everybody has their own. I'm just venting. Your story, your personal story, just affected me very, very much.
So Yuri, I think what you described as your personal opinion is a bit more of a hard truth and a hard reality out there. You attach some emotion to it, but the facts on the ground bear out everything you said.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I have to ask that question anyway. We need advice in that case. In that situation that we are right now, we need to activate maybe the land lease. Maybe we need to reinforce other programs, but the lack of weapons is badly. And the words that were pronounced by President of Poland, Andrzej Duda, are really very troubling. And I think we should see them very seriously. I think that the United States were capable all the time, all these 11 months, almost a year now, to reinforce the Ukrainian army more effectively, so that the war could maybe be won by now already. But we are now still in a position. Of course, Ukraine is, I must admit, practically in a total dependence on the will of the White House, and maybe some personal things matter also. I don't know. But the fact is that while this year we heard a lot of military people from the US saying that the war could be won by Ukraine long ago if United States would involve more, would give more weapons. We are not asking to fight instead of us. We are not saying that we need soldiers from the United States, but we need much more weapons. Give us, please, advice. What should be done? What else can we do? Not in order not to lose the war, where it could be won already long ago.
Okay. If you'll bear with me, I'll give you three things that I think the Ukraine military can do, or Ukraine as a whole can do. The first one is fixed logistics. I talked about that briefly. But they've got to modernize from a pull system, a demand system, to a push system, as I previously described. That requires total asset visibility. So we have to know what all your equipment is, what the inventory is, because from that, we can estimate the number of repair parts and ammunition that will be consumed, et cetera. Okay?
The log fast system now perfectly installed, that it's done. There was an American delegation who visited Ukraine to reassure that it's done, and it's done. LogFast, the system to check up all the logistics, is already installed and it's working in Ukraine. Maybe it will solve partly all of the whole delivery system, and it will be more transparent. I think that's what Ukrainians are already doing.
So the system is installed. I disagree with the characterization that it's working. By the way, that's a NATO system that the nations get to have visibility on. So I don't think it's working at the tactical level yet. And what I mean by that is I know for a fact that if I were to send 10 pieces of equipment to a specific unit in Ukraine, that maybe 3 or 5 of those pieces of equipment will get there because somebody's going to divert that equipment to other units, or it will go to a warehouse somewhere. I am not making any allegation of people selling it on the black market. I don't believe that's going on at all.
Right.
I think the equipment is being diverted from where it's intended to go to other places, which corrupts the log-fast system. If the log-fast system says a unit in Donbass, we'll just call it Unit 123, needs 5 BMPs, we send those 5 and only 2 show up, you've corrupted the system because you've shorted them, and the system will show that they have 5 because 5 were sent. And you've further compounded the error because there are 3 out there in units where they didn't belong to begin with. So there are elements of, I would say, integrity from the sourcing of the equipment through the provision of it to the user, where things get diverted for not nefarious purposes, for legitimate purposes, but that doesn't get where it goes. So there are issues along those lines that I know exist. And I know as recently as 2 weeks ago from an assessment that I read. Okay, now, the second thing is, I'm sorry, Maria, let me pause there. I've got 2 more things that I think Ukraine can do, but let me pause there in case you want to come back to me with another point.
Excuse me. 2 more things.
Yeah, I got 2 more things, but I wanted to pause there unless you wanted to take me to task for my explanation on the logistics side.
I think we should analyze.
It was clear.
What you have said now, and we have to analyze your words. I'm not so precise now. I believe that Ukraine, in a situation of a total lack of equipment, of a total lack of armament, sometimes needs to do something to keep alive, to keep moving, to keep going on. And sometimes maybe you can't do it just in the alphabetic row. And sometimes you need to act, as you say, more flexible. Maybe that's everything that is happening out of lack, general lack. It will be insufficient, even if it would be scheduled and everything on time and everywhere where it should be. Still, there would be an immense lack, and who knows what's going to be next. I mean, in a situation of total insufficiency, well.
Yeah. So, I agree with you. There are going to be excesses and shortages in the logistics system throughout. That's because there's never enough to go around, and sometimes the bureaucracy becomes inefficient. So I agree with you on that point in particular. Also, I'm quite impressed that you knew about the log-fast system. As an opera singer, that's not something that that you should be familiar with, but by golly, you are. So that's quite impressive. So well done.
She knows a lot of things. If you watch her,
I see that. Okay, she's being. I have to pay very close attention.
Sometimes I'm like, how do you know that? I mean, I'm just like, I know. I mean, she's a spy. She's typical.
Perhaps.
Typical Russian spy from an American Hollywood movie. I always suspected her.
All right, so I've got 2 other points where I think the Ukrainian army can improve. So, first off, I recognized in March, certainly in April, that the Ukrainian army that you have, is probably not the Ukrainian army that's going to push Russia out of Ukraine. The Ukrainian army that you have is going to significantly degrade and defeat a large part of the Russian army that's there now, and they've done a fantastic job at this. I have no questions about the bravery or capability of the Ukrainian army in that regard. They have shown the world how to kill Russians, and they do it quite well. However, there needed to be, starting in April, a second army built with modern NATO equipment, going to your point, Maria, with NATO modern equipment to replace the things that we knew were going to wear out that were of the Soviet and Russian era, like the T-62s, T-72s, T-80s that Ukraine has, the BMPs, the Soviet era equipment. So we needed to start training those guys back in April to build this second army. The second army is being trained now to be introduced this spring to help push Russia out. But we needed to have a comprehensive training package along with equipping package back in the spring. But I still think it's possible. We're not out of time here. I do agree with President Duda's point that if we don't get on the ball here, we risk, we collectively, the international community, risks a defeat in Ukraine that will be unacceptable to any of us that we know. But the second Ukrainian army needs to be built, and it needs to have modern equipment or NATO standard equipment that accepts NATO repair parts, NATO ammunition, that kind of business, rather than trying to buy old tank ammunition or artillery ammunition from Cambodia and Vietnam, for Pete's sake. Okay, so that's the second thing. The third thing is already underway and is going quite well, I think. That's to continue to root out top-level corruption. Look, the strategic center of gravity for Ukraine is Western support. Okay? Now, under the Clausewitzian theory of war, every nation has a center of gravity from which it is the hub from which all its power emanates. And for Ukraine, the hub from which all power emanates is the Western support that's provided to Ukraine to sustain the conflict, all right, to make them successful. That support has to be sustained above all else. And this corruption that we've read about in the Western media about food prices or this, that, and the other, whatever has happened out there has a corrosive effect on domestic and political support at home.
Absolutely.
And puts that Western support at risk.
Absolutely.
So I think I know that the actions that have been taken so far have sought to preserve that Western support in the center of gravity that is supporting Ukraine. I just urge that the government and the people remain vigilant along those lines and continue to take action the way they've done so far. So let me pause there for additional topics.
I think that the Ukrainian government is working very tough on that subject, and we're doing good progress. We're doing good progress.
People are not happy here. They're not stupid.
Yes, but just in order to, we have the lack of time and lack of weaponry. That's something that is urging us.
Right. Well,
all these strategic ways to, of course, you are completely right. I agree with every word about that. We have to work on all of these subjects. The point is that we don't have so much time. And all these kind of changements, they do need time. Probably maybe in some personal ways, I think that you're helping very, very much, not only by openly said and sometimes even evident efforts that you do, but also by being so involved and so warm-hearted toward Ukraine. And thank you for that. And I guess I can say, but I guess that you do much more than even you say in order to help Ukraine. And please don't stop your efforts. We do need very much your help.
And one day we will take you all around Ukraine and you'll see this beautiful country and beautiful people and very, very brave souls that fight hard. Sir, they fight hard with very little that they have. And I think that the Russians realized that eventually and hopefully sooner than later, the differences between the White House and the Congress and Europe and the United States will come to an end, and that dam is going to break loose, and we're going to flood Ukraine with everything we have, and they're going to be beaten. So it's just a race against time, and Russians know it, and that's why they're mobilizing. That's why they're throwing, fodder meat at the front. Just as Stalin said, sometimes quantity will replace quality, and this is their old style: carpet bombing and just destroying everything on their way as barbarians. But we're dealing with a terrorist state. We're dealing with a terrorist KGB thugs that have no morals. They have no standards. They're just absolutely. We can't live with them on the same and share the same planet any longer. Something has to change. And sir, I can't express how proud I am to have to serve with you for 30 years in our greatest military in the world. And I appreciate your service. I also appreciate your help for Ukraine, for the wounded soldiers. Hopefully, I'm going to be coming home soon, bringing some more. And you owe me your challenge coin.
Okay. All right. It's a deal. All right. So I look forward to coming back to Ukraine someday. I was there in March. It did go over so well, or actually April. I take that back. It caused a bit of a stir, and I would say, pressured not to do that again. But I've been teaching there from 2016 onward, and I left there January. I left there about January 22nd of this past year. So it's been over a year since I've been there, but I look forward to coming back. And doing whatever I can to be of assistance.
Thank you, sir. And we thank you. We thank you for staying on the right side of history. We all have to, take those risks and criticism in some of our actions. But in our careers, if we didn't take risks and we didn't take criticism, we wouldn't have been doing what we did for so many years.
Yeah, tracking.
I thank you very much, sir.
God bless.
Maria, it's entirely nice to meet you. I look forward to any other engagements you guys are interested in. Yuri, stay in touch, my friend.
Yes, sir.
I dream about inviting you to a opera concert, maybe in Ukraine.
Or maybe my Ukrainian will be sufficient by then. Right now, it's quite horrible. Дуже pogano.
Дуже pogano.
We move towards our common Ukrainian victory. Thank you so much.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
До побачення. До бачення.
До побачення.
До побачення.
Слава Україні!
Тоді для наших глядачів разом до перемоги і слава Україні.
Героям слава.
Героям слава. Yeah.
Very good, sir.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.